Hi, welcome to Azure User Group Sweden. Hi, Håkan. How are you today, this
Hello,
weekend?
Jonah. I'm very fine. How are you?
I'm doing doing great. Thank you for asking. We have a beautiful winter day today, this Saturday. And hi, everyone that are spending time with us this weekend. And we're glad to be back with a new session in our community group.
Yes. Yeah. I guess before we start here, we should just give a quick introduction of ourselves. So,
Yes.
um, so let me start here. Um, so I'm very proud here and honored to introduce Jonah Anderson. So she's the founder of our user group, and she's also a Microsoft Azure MVP and a Microsoft certified trainer. And she has recently written and published a book on O'Reilly, and she also spends a lot of time mentoring as a mentor, and she's international public speaker, and she has very recently also won an award. What was that award, Jonah?
Yeah, I recently received an award for Developer of the Year at the Nordic Women in Tech Awards. So thank you so much for everyone that supported me in the community work that I do. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yes,
congratulations. And in
thanks.
her daily job, she works as a senior Azure consultant at Solidify.
Yeah, thank you, Håkan. And let me introduce you, Håkan, to those that are new in our community. So Håkan is my co-host and my co-community leader at Azure User Group Sweden. He works as an AI specialist at Miles, Norway, and he's also a Microsoft MVP for AI, and he is very active in different communities such as .NET user group in Oslo, the AI 42 and AI school, as well as he's also a public speaker, Microsoft certified trainer, and a lot more. So it's an honor to have Håkan with me as my partner in this community.
Yes, thank you.
And I think we're gonna show the code of conduct. So I'm having, yeah,
Yes.
that's good. All right. So before we start, we would like to share to everyone that we follow a code of conduct, and in this code of conduct, we expect everyone to be nice and friendly, listen with purpose, and be thoughtful, be respectful to others, and seek to understand and not criticize. Be curious and open to share your ideas with others in live chat, live stream, or even the after session ficas that we have. And be inclusive and respectful in your comments and questions. And if you have feedback about our code of conduct, feel free to reach out to me and Håkan on LinkedIn.
Yes.
And then we also have a learner badger for those that are Azure heroes. So if you have your phone with you, you may scan the QR code and grab the Azure Heroes learner badge for learning with us today, or even the recorded session after this. And we also have added a link to a session learning path, how you would learn more about deploying Azure infrastructure with GitHub Action by going to the bit.ly link, the ASUG Sweden dash Azure.aac. And you will learn more a lot about it as well from our guest speaker today.
Yes. And then finally, we also after our show, as usual, we would like to invite you for a short digital fika. And unfortunately, today our speaker can't join us, but anyway, me and Jonah will be there, and we can discuss more about the topic and contents here of today's session.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. So then I think it's time here for us to introduce our speaker. So let us welcome here on to the show Till Spindler.
Hi,
Hi, Till. Welcome. Thank you for joining us to share knowledge today. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. little bit nervous, sorry, but sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it
How
the first time you're
about you?
talk virtually?
Sorry?
Is this the first time that you're delivering a talk virtually in a community?
Yeah, a live one. It's the first time.
Oh,
Training in the past,
congratulations.
but it's first time. So yeah,
Yeah, don't worry. We're here for you.
thanks.
Yeah, so,
Yes.
so let me have just a little bit more formal introduction here to Till. So Till has more than 15 years of experience building and running .NET-based web applications. And the last 8 years, he took the Scrum role of a developer and product owner in an Agile Product Development team. He was also responsible for software architecture, software security, and they implemented the use of DevOps. And they also coached his and other teams with peer programming and workshops. And in November 2022, he changed his focus and now he follows his interest in new technologies and help customers to adopt or improve their DevOps. So we're really happy to have you here, Till.
Thanks
Yes.
for
Yes.
giving me the opportunity.
Yes. And you are, I believe you're joining us from Germany also, right? Because you work for Xpirit Germany.
Correct.
Yes, yes.
Located
Okay.
in Germany
Yes.
right now.
Yeah.
Mm.
I did I think one of your colleagues that's who is an MVP sent me a pin that says for the certification pin. So that reminded me of that and you speaking and coming from that company. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
so Till, would you like to say a couple of words about your session here for our viewers? What can they expect to learn?
Yeah, for sure. So I want to talk about infrastructure as code with Pulumi and GitHub Actions. So I'm also a GitHub certified trainer, delivering a lot of GitHub trainings. And GitHub Actions is for me nowadays the first solution for creating workflows or automate things. And yeah, doing a lot of stuff on our technical basis with our customer on GitHub Actions already. And I just joined the Azure the Azure world last year in November,
Yeah.
and got
That's great.
certified in different ways, and thought also covered the topic infrastructure as code, and for sure see Terraform, for example. But because I have a .NET background, developer background, I thought maybe there are some other ideas of creating infrastructure as code than using HCL, for example. And then I think the first time I heard of Pulumi was a podcast from Scott Hanselman.
Mm.
He gives some shout outs to Pulumi. And so I thought maybe I can check it. And I think it's pretty useful, especially for the developers, which are not common for infrastructure as code or operations at all, to get
Okay.
first in touch with the topic, because a lot of customers still have the silos between developer and operations, and as a DevOps consultant, it's my job to bring them both together. And I think Pulumi can bridge the gap pretty good.
Yeah.
So, and then I
Interesting.
thought, yeah, maybe I can create a talk out of this topic and combine Pulumi, which is a standalone solution for doing infrastructure as code, and connect it with the DevOps idea for CI/CD with GitHub Actions. And then, yeah, that's the reason why I'm here today. And I hope
Yeah,
I
exciting.
can give you some little
Yeah.
information or deep dive into this topic.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, I do. I work with cloud development and DevOps a lot, and also code some infrastructure as code, but Terraform. So
Yeah,
your topic with Pulumi and GitHub Action would be something I'm going to learn and take notes in the background. So I look forward.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so then I think we will leave the stage over here to you, Till.
yeah. Thank you very much for letting me in. And when there are any questions, maybe we can cover all the topics together and ask them in the Q&A after the presentation. So very welcome to my session, Infrastructure as Code with Pulumi and GitHub Actions. Yeah, I was already introduced by Hakan, but maybe some additional notes over here. I will share the slides or a repo where the slides are living in, and also the commands for following up the demos. So if you want to reach out, you can find me on GitHub or LinkedIn, for example, or follow up my blog. And next to the GitHub Actions or GitHub Certified Trainer, I'm also MCT. And yes, so let's step in directly into the presentation or the talk. So first of all, we want to take a closer look what is infrastructure as code, in short IAC. And I will use the short version here in my slides. Then we will know a little bit more about Pulumi, what's the background, how Pulumi works, and how to can get started, for example. And then we will create a live demo with Pulumi using Azure Static Website to deploy it. And then we will cover GitHub Actions, learn a little bit about GitHub Actions, and then we will create a GitHub Actions workflow to deploy, or using CI/CD, or more the CD part, to deploy our Pulumi static website to Azure after pushing to the repository. And last but not least, I've prepared a more advanced example, but we will see it in some minutes, what's the content over there. Infrastructure as code overview. So infrastructure as code is the practice of managing infrastructure in a declarative manner using code. So instead of using portal.azure.com, for example, and using the UI for building up infrastructure, we can use infrastructure as code and use the version control system and use the benefits out of it, especially when we want to recreate infrastructure on code on different environments, for example. So that's basically the idea. Instead of manual configuring the infrastructure, ISC allows you to define the desired state of your infrastructure in code. And yeah, a lot of guys, especially the software developers, where I'm also coming from, for sure love coding, and doing infrastructure as code, in my opinion, is also a good topic to introduce the developers into the operations or infrastructure topic at all. Yeah, the code can be then version controlled, tested, and deployed in a repeatable and consistent manner. So especially on security purpose, for example, it's also a good idea to take a look into infrastructure as code. Yeah, and nowadays ISC tools have can manage a wide range of infrastructure. So it's not only sticking to Azure, for example. You can use infrastructure as code on GitHub. You can use it on AWS, all the common cloud providers, and a lot of other topics there as well. So it's worth take a look into the topic. Benefits, in my opinion, increased efficiency and consistency. So if you have to repeat or recreate environments in the same state, in the same manner, it's always good using code instead of a manual approach. Improved collaboration and version control. So you can use code reviews, for example, if you want to change your infrastructure as code to make sure, the 4IS principle, for example, and you can keep up the quality for your infrastructure as well as on the normal code level. Reduce for sure the risk of human error, faster time to deployment, and also improved scalability and flexibility, because when you're using infrastructure as code as a repository, you can fork the repository, for example, and then do your own changes, tweak it to your needs, and then reconsume it on your side, for example. Yeah, maybe some words about some representatives, which are on, there are a lot of more, so that's just a pick out of the most common tools, in my opinion. So Terraform, for sure, open source, coming from HashiCorp. Use the declarative language to define infrastructure, so that's maybe also the biggest, the biggest difference when we see it to Pulumi, for example. Supports a wide range of cloud providers and services. Provides a plan command to preview changes before applying them. So if you want to make sure and to check what the changes on your code, for example, will look like in production or on the cloud side, you can plan them and preview them, and has a large and active community of users and contributors. So yeah, and maybe Ansible as another one, open source tool from Red Hat, uses a procedural language to define infrastructure, supports a wide range of cloud providers and services too, and pretty similar to the plan command, has a try run mode to preview changes before applying them. And most of the common used tools nowadays have these preview or try run functionality in there, and also has a large and active community of users and contributors. Okay, so that's maybe the covering the topic about infrastructure as code. We will learn some additional stuff during the session. And now I want to switch over to Pulumi. So Pulumi is an open source tool for managing cloud infrastructure. And unlike maybe other infrastructure as code tools, Pulumi uses familiar programming languages. So like JavaScript, Python, .NET or C# and Go to define infrastructure. So that's maybe also the other approach using Pulumi. So especially for developers who want to get in touch with this topic, it's pretty helpful when they can stay in their own language, in C#, for example, and just use the SDK, which is provided from Pulumi, instead of learning a completely new and maybe also a different way of working for Terraform with HCL, for example. It also supports a wide range of cloud providers and services, including AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and Kubernetes, but also Alibaba Cloud, GitHub, so pretty long list nowadays. Also provides a preview command to preview the changes before we apply them on production on our infrastructure and do the changes over there. And they're using stacks, and stacks gives us the possibility to create multiple environments. For example, dev, staging, and prod. And then we have, especially when we're using ring-based deployment or things like that, we can use stacks for cover this topic inside of Pulumi. And also has a growing community of users and contributors, and it's also backed by some venture capital firms like Essel and Metrona Venture Group. And also, in my opinion, the documentation and the starting examples are pretty good to ramp up on this topic. Yeah, some featured package. You see more than 130 packages and are available, and the number is growing. So you can use this for deploy to Azure, Google Cloud, Kubernetes, GitHub. So a long list, and then I also can share later on to some additional links to see which packages are available and then can be used for infrastructure as code in your projects. And the languages and SDKs which are available, so you can use Node.js, so JavaScript, TypeScript if you want to. If you are more a Python developer, you can use Python. You can use Go or the whole .NET group with C#, Visual Basic, F#, whatever you prefer. I'm a C# guy, so I'm coming from the .NET C# corner. And so all my examples today will be in C#. But if you are more a Java developer, you can use this one. And if you also would like to handle it like HCL in a more declarative way, you can use Pulumi YAML as well. So define your infrastructure as code as YAML files is also possible. Okay, so to maybe understand the concept behind Pulumi, Pulumi covers all the topics in a thing called project. So that's the boundary for all these things. And inside of the project, you have your program. So program can be for sure, .NET application, or maybe it's just a static website. And next to this, you have the program or your Pulumi program, which contains the infrastructure as code. So you specify resources and in your preferred language, and the resources can get inputs, for example, and also create outputs. So if you have some requirements for the names, for example, how the resources should look like on the Azure side, you can specify some inputs. And also if on the Azure side are links created for getting access to your static website, for example, it will be covered in the output, and you have later on access to these values and can use this in your code as well. And for sure, you can use sequential programming over there. So create some first resources first, use their output as input for the next resources. So that's not a problem at all. But in the end, you end up with some resources deployed to your cloud provider. And you have the possibility to track the stacks. So in this case here, we have the dev, QA, and prod stack, which can be handled separately, and we will see it in some minute what's the concept behind the stacks. Stacks in Pulumi are like isolated, independently configurable instances of your Pulumi program. So it's pretty common that these stacks have different deployment versions, for example, of your source code and also of your infrastructure as code. They are used to denote different phases of your development. So like doing it in a normal way, you bring it to dev and then later on to QA or staging and then later to production, depending on your deployment process. And you also can use it for feature branches there as well. So when you're using pull request deployments, for example, on the GitHub side and want to deploy your infrastructure directly into a pull request environment, it's also supported. Each stack has its own configuration file, which is part of our project. And in the configuration file, you can specify configuration values which should be applied to your stack. So for example, the location of your Azure resources. And you can switch between stacks using the Pulumi CLI, and we will see it in the demo parts as well. Yeah, there's a Pulumi CLI in place, which can be used for creating new projects and handling all the stack things. So Pulumi stack select, and then the name allows you to select or change between stacks. And you can also use Pulumi stack ls for giving you a whole list of all the stacks, which are part of your project. Okay, if you want to get started with Pulumi, it's pretty easy. So I didn't mention it. Pulumi is a cloud-based infrastructure as code service. So it has a cloud application between you and your cloud provider. And the cloud service takes care of all the important stuff. We will see the Pulumi cloud in the demo then there as well. So hit up pulumi.com or IO, I'm not pretty sure. Create an account over there. It's pretty easy. You can also use GitHub, your GitHub account for if you want to, or create a new one. And then inside the Pulumi CLI via download or package manager like Homebrew or Chocolatey on your machine. And then it's pretty easy and you are up to go. So creating a new project is also pretty straightforward. If you know what you want to do, you can use the Pulumi new command with some options, C# and -y starting from scratch. So giving you an empty C# Pulumi project where you can start from scratch. Or if you maybe start from a specific template, which we'll be using in the demo, Pulumi new gives you an assistant or a choice of using what for language, for example, you want to use and what's your desired provider and what you want to deploy over there. And then you have a starting point to start your deployment or your development. Okay, and now I want to start with a static website on Azure with C#. So that's the basic idea. And let's move over to the terminal. I hope it's readable for everyone. So let's get started. At first, I'm creating a new folder for our project, and then I have to step in with change directory. Sorry. Okay, and the next thing is we want to create our new Pulumi project, and therefore we use Pulumi new. And like already mentioned, we have a long list which for available options and starting templates, and I'm using we're using static website Azure with C#. Load this one here. It will now ask you some questions about how the project should be named, and it's proposing the name of the current folder. So we say yes. Short descriptions also available coming from the template, but can be changed. And then we have to specify our first stack, and I will stick to the default here, which is called dev. Okay, and now I have the possibility to also specify the region I want to deploy to, and because I'm located in Europe, I will use the West Europe location. And now it's asking, because we're using the static website for the error HTML file, I leave it as a default here as well, and the index HTML file, which is directly shown when we're starting the website. And it's also asking us where the files are living, and the classic way under the www folder. Then it's doing some internal stuff, and now we see some additional information. So it's created our project for us, installed some dependency, because the .NET thing and Azure part provider are downloaded as some kind of plugins or modules to your machine to make sure your Pulumi installation is as clean and small as possible. And yeah, so okay. And the next thing for me is because we want to later on use GitHub Actions to bring or make a repository out of our current folder and bring it to GitHub. So that are the next steps. I'm creating repository in my current folder, and then I'm using the GitHub CLI with gh repo create to create a new repository on the GitHub side. So, and I choose here push an existing local repository, because we want to the previously created one, and say yes, it's the current folder. Repository name Pulumi demo is also good. I put it into Spindler, which is my GitHub handle. So you can maybe also add it to an organization, for example. But in this case, description can be empty, and the public one. And I also want to create a remote so that my local Git repository is directly connected. Origin is the default name. Okay, so now we have the Git repository, and the next step is we want to add our previously created content. So we're using git add commit. I'm using git signing, so it's asking me for one password here. Sign the commit, and then we're using git push. Okay, so now we have also the repository on the GitHub side we will use later on. And the next step is we want to give Pulumi the way to deploy the infrastructure from our local machine, because we just want to create a static website and pack it into a repository. So first step is I also have the Azure CLI installed. So I have to make sure I'm logged into the Azure world using Azure login. And it's asking me here which account to use. And I get the confirmation which is shown up. I'm now logged in to the Azure world. And the next step is we want to use Pulumi up. So Pulumi up is the command to deploy the resources. There's also a Pulumi preview available to make it a preview, and Pulumi destroy or down is the downside to disassemble all the resources or clear the resources from the cloud provider. So first step is it's building the .NET project here with our C# project, and gives us here some information how the changes on the Azure world would look like. So we have a resource group, we have a storage account, we have a CDN profile, we have a storage account static website, which is required, and we have some endpoints available. And for sure, we have some blobs inside of the where our files are living in, the index HTML file. And also when we add additional JavaScript, for example, or images, it will also be part there. So, and now it's showing us what will happening on the Azure side. And for now, I will say, yes, please do the update on the Azure thing. per default is using the default subscription on the Azure side. So if you want to specify the subscription, you can put it into the YAML file or the configuration file of your stack, and then change the subscription on the Azure end. Hopefully the connection is good today. That's not taking too long. Okay, so now, in my opinion, also a pretty good output on the CLI. We've always seen what is Pulumi doing in the background. I can also use the browser to come to the Pulumi cloud to see the deployment over there. It's giving me all the information. I see what was newly created, how much time it took, and I also get the outputs available over here. And for example, the URL, which is also be clickable directly. And that's the case now. Hello World deployed with Pulumi is the basic example or the index HTML file. So it worked. That's pretty good. And now I would like to open up the Visual Studio Code. And just to take a look into the project and project structure. So we have the Pulumi YAML file, which gives or holds the information about the whole project. So name, runtime, and the description. We have the dev YAML configuration for our dev stack. And we see the West Europe and also the things which we were asked while creating our project are stored in the dev YAML file there as well. We have a normal CS project file with the NuGet packages for Pulumi, Azure Native, and Sync folder. And then pretty easy, we have the program CS. So in this case, we also specify some configuration content, the index file, the error file, and the folder where the files are living in. And when you see it here on the left, we have this www folder, and there are some basic error HTML and index HTML file. We specify the resource group. For sure, we can apply naming here as well if we want to, but for easiness purposes, just leave it as it is. We create a blob storage account. You can specify all the values and options for the storage account here as well. And how you see, it's just normal C# code. So not a big deal or big difference than deploying or using other SDKs as well. But in this case, we are using infrastructure as code. So standard LRS, and then we're creating, the static account or static website in the storage account with the source group and the index document, the error document, and so on. And the synced folder where our actual files are living, and then the CDN profile and the endpoints. So all the stuff which is necessary on the Azure side to create a static website are all in place, can be changed in this way. Or for example, if you have the requirement to use multiple CDNs or multiple endpoints, for example, it's pretty easy just to wrap it up in the for each loop, for example, and then deploy it to different locations, for example, to make sure the response time on the Azure side is still good. Okay, and last but not least, the topic are the outputs, so which are then coming back from the Azure Resource Manager back to Pulumi, are then stored here in some output variables, which then can be used, for example, to add additional resources based on the values we are getting back over here. Okay, and what I want to show up now is when we're using or change something in the world, in the index HTML file, for example, and we add, it's not only, or maybe in, hello world, thanks for joining us today. I just specify the changes over here, and when I grab a terminal inside here, I can just run Pulumi up again. So it's doing the same stuff again. It's building the project at the whole, but we didn't change anything. So it will not change any part of the resources, except the index.html file, which was changed. And that's also shown up over here. It will replace the index.html file because it's modified in the background and there were some changes. And when we do a yes over here to perform it, it will also go a little bit faster this time. So it's deleting the old blob file and creating a new one. We have the link available here as well. And hopefully it's not working. Okay, that was not supposed to happen. Normally we should see the additional message over here. I'm not pretty sure what's the problem right now. Okay, so yeah. Sorry for that. I also have a fully prepared demo backup available, which I can share also with you afterwards, because sometimes the demos are not running as expected. Okay, let me quickly go back to the presentation. So the next thing is GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions is a generic workflow engine, part of the GitHub product family, has more than 35 triggers available, so it can be used in a wider range than CI/CD. You can use it for issue ops, for example, or all the stuff you want to automate can be done via GitHub Actions. And especially when your repository is already on GitHub, it's pretty easy to set it up and use it. So, and you can also create your own actions, which then can be used in the workflows of yourself or other people pretty easy by creating a repository with your action and then referencing them in the YAML file of your workflow. And so it's pretty easy to use actions which are living on GitHub. So no installation for plugins or from the marketplace like it's on the Azure DevOps side. Just name it and then you can run it. So it's also giving support for a lot of programming languages and frameworks. And it's fully integrated with all the other GitHub features, like GitHub packages for storing NuGet, NPM, Maven packages on the GitHub side, GitHub pages for hosting static website on GitHub, and a lot of other features. And you can write your own actions pretty easy using one of the types. So the basic or the normal ones are JavaScript and TypeScript actions. You also have some starting points in place where you can start, or not starting from scratch, creating a new action. You can use Docker. So every Docker image can also be used as an action, which gives us you the full flexibility to use your programming language. The only necessary requirement, it should be or have to be part of a Docker container, for example. Yeah, and composite actions are just actions where you have some repeatable steps. So it's more some kind of a declarative way of writing actions. The actions are running on the GitHub hosted runners, which have you some free minutes available depending on your GitHub plan. And if you want to run it on your own, you can use self-hosted runners on your on-prem data center, but also in Azure, for example, on virtual machines or Kubernetes cluster, whatever you want to prefer. And if you want to scale them automatically, you can use self-hosted runners with Action Runner Controller, which is also part of GitHub feature nowadays, short ARC, and gives you then the same functionality like the GitHub hosted runners on your own Kubernetes cluster. And runner images are available for GitHub hosted runners and also for the self-hosted runners Ubuntu, Linux, Windows, and macOS. So you have the possibility to build it in all the three most common operating systems. Getting started with GitHub Actions is also pretty easy. So you create a YAML workflow file in your repository. And the action or workflow files has to be or have to live on the .github/workflows folder. So that's important to only when they are there, they are recognized as valid workflows. And you have then to specify some additional information. So name, on, trigger, jobs, and steps, for example. So you see an example on the right side, pretty easy hello world. Specify a name, you specify the trigger. Push means when you push to the GitHub repository. And we have additional trigger, manual trigger, for example, or a REST API trigger. So when you're calling a REST API on the GitHub side, it can trigger a workflow as well, or creating an issue can also be a trigger. And then jobs, you can specify multiple jobs. They are running in parallel per default, but you can chain them using the needs keyword. And the job has an runs on syntax element available, in this case Ubuntu latest. So I want to build it on Ubuntu, and then I have to specify the steps, and those are the atomic actions on the workflow. And in this case we are on the Ubuntu and can run a command on our Ubuntu echo hello world. So also pretty easy. And especially when you also can use PowerShell, for example. So when you're on the Windows or PowerShell core, you can use next to Bash PowerShell as well. Okay, and now we want to add GitHub Actions workflow to our repository or previously created repositories. So give me a second. Maybe it's now updated here in the background. No, okay. So let me create a new file. GitHub workflows deploy YAML. And like already mentioned, all the stuff is also written down in the slides repository, which will be shared. Okay, and to take a closer look, we have the name. We want to deploy to Azure. We want to happen or trigger the thing on push. We need some additional things here because we connecting the GitHub Actions to Azure. We need a trust connection, and therefore we also need this requirement here, ID token, to establish the connection between GitHub and Azure. And then we have the job deploy. It runs on Ubuntu latest. And we have the checkout action. So we're checking out our current repository. We're doing basically the same stuff I've done on the terminal on my local machine here in the workflow as well. So we're using Azure Login, which is an action coming from the marketplace. And Azure Login needs some additional information because we can't use an interactive login like on my local machine. And therefore, we're using OpenID Connect, OIDC, which is pretty safe nowadays and also the recommended way of handling connections. So there's no need for secrets here anymore, just some basic information. Client ID for our Azure application or Microsoft Entra application, the tenant ID for the tenant, and the subscription ID, which we want to work on. And then we're using the Pulumi action, which is also part on the marketplace. And we specify the command which we are running or want to run. It's up. And stack name is the dev stack we are worked on previously. And then we handle over some environment variables to the action to make sure Pulumi is also available to deploy to Azure. So we specify Azure Resource Manager use OIDC for connecting. We specify the Pulumi access token so that we can get access to the Pulumi cloud service, and also specifying the client ID, tenant ID, and subscription ID. So that's pretty basic, not that difficult. And now let me add this here as well. Git commit -m Okay, so now we pushed it to the server. And when we take a look into my repository, I have the Pulumi demo, which we have created with all the same content like on my side. Sorry, why it's not available? Sorry, I put the GitHub Actions folder under www. That's not the place to be. Come on. Sorry. Sometimes it's a little bit good. That should be the correct part. Let me move the file over here and also rename it. Okay, now it's also showing up here as a valid GitHub action because I have the Visual Studio Code GitHub Actions extension installed as well. Okay, there you go. And now we should see in the Actions tab on the GitHub side that it's directly starting the workflow. And now the workflow should fail because we haven't set up the OI OpenID Connect connection. And that's also a log live feature. When you're using with Azure Pipelines, for example, it's pretty similar. So you can step in and take a look what's happening on the steps over here. And we see we have some trouble. The CLI login failed because the credentials are missing. So therefore, the next step is we have some secrets available, or we can put it directly into our GitHub repository and then reference, or we had referenced them in our workflow. So therefore, we have to grab the values from Entra, the new Azure AD instance for all the authorization and authentication stuff. And here we have I've prepared an application or app registration. In this case, it's GitHub Actions Spindler. And here I have the client ID, which I have to use, the tenant ID, and the subscription ID is coming from the normal Azure portal. And in the repo, which I provide with you afterwards, there's also the guideline how to create the app, how to give access to the subscriptions. It's a little bit tricky sometimes to set it up. But if you set it up, you all just need to add federated credentials over here to make sure the GitHub repository is allowed to use the app registration and deploy to Azure. So in this case, we have to add here GitHub Actions deploying Azure resources. And then I have to specify some information about my repository, the name of the repository. In this case, we are deploying on the branch, based on branches from the main branch. And we also can specify a name over here. So that's a required step to add a federated identity to your app registration to make sure your repository is able to deploy the Azure resources. Okay, and now I'm using this values over here, and I add them here as secrets. So we have the Azure client ID. We have the Azure tenant ID. This one. Sorry, and ID. Azure subscription ID. And I'm using my MSDN sponsored subscription. And all the values here are secretly stored on the GitHub side. And the last one is our Pulumi access token. And the token we can grab from app.pulumi.com. I'm also signed in using my GitHub account, and here you have all the list of your projects. For example, so Pulumi demo is here. We see all the stacks are available, my Pulumi demo backup project, and also my advanced thing. And when we want to create a personal access token, we can use it here and create a token for our Pulumi demo. And then copy the token, put it over here. Okay, so that's basically the idea, and hopefully when it's working correctly now, and I'm doing some changes over here and GitHub. And I'm adding it, committing. So now I've done my changes on my static website, and it now should, or I push it to the GitHub repository. That should trigger the workflow. That looks pretty good. And hopefully everything is working correctly using the secrets in the background. I should be able to log in into Azure. Okay, that worked. And now it's running Pulumi up, and it's the same thing. Instead of on a local machine, it's using the repository. Check it out, the repository. Also building the application again, seeing, okay, the index HTML file has changed, and hopefully it's working here as expected. Okay, now it's working, maybe a little bit difficult, but now we have the things in place. So I'm now able to have a repository, working on my repository, doing changes to the static website, for example, and using Pulumi and GitHub Actions to deploy it to Azure. For sure, it's a pretty basic example, but yeah. And I have also prepared a more advanced example, which is the last topic of my talk today. And there I have an ASP.NET MVC application written in C# as well. And I want to achieve running the application on Azure Container Apps, and want to use also automated updates after changes to the code appear. And we do this the same way like the static website. So we have a Pulumi project with the required infrastructure. We Dockerize the MVC application to make it or to use it in Azure Container Apps. And we're using GitHub Actions workflow to deploy it to Azure as part of our CI/CD process. And we still to have to use the OIDC connection between GitHub Actions and Azure. And that's a prepared example. It's also referenced in the slides repository so that you can take a closer look later on. And that's this one over here. So infrastructure as code, ISC with Pulumi and GitHub Actions. And here we have the demo app, so which is normal MVC application. We have our controllers folder, we have our models, we have our views in place. And additionally, I have some tests here for continuous integration, for example, and IAC here as well. And IAC is our Pulumi project. And instead of creating the static website, we here have the code which is necessary to create our container apps. So resource group here as well. Log analytics workspace is required. And then we have the app environment. We have a registry, so ACR for hosting our image. And we have then the demo app as well to specify the content of the image. So it's all the content which is necessary to build the Docker container with the Docker file, upload it to the Azure ACR, and then put it into the container app and set it to production. So that's the more advanced example. Just showing up over here, you have the possibility to take a closer look to later on. But it's maybe a more advanced example to show the power of Pulumi, and especially in connection with the GitHub Actions deployments. Yeah, and when we take a look on the workflow here as well, next to the Pulumi things, we have here the continuous deployment pipeline, and the pipeline look pretty similar. The difference over here is that I also use environment, which are part of GitHub Actions, and gives us the possibility to specify the environments on our GitHub Actions as well. So next to the stacks on the Pulumi side, which are called dev, for example, I can add the environments here as well. And maybe you can see this here as well. We can use the outputs from the Pulumi action, which are created on the Azure side, as URLs here as well. And that allows us to deploy, for example, here directly with the linked or the link coming from the Azure side to get access. And with environments, we also have the possibility to add manual approval before we want to deploy to production, for example. That's shown over here. The deployment production rules, I have allowed it the last time runs, and when I click on the link, it should bring us to the prepared example. Maybe the first time starting the app is a little bit slow, but in this case now we see there's a basic MVC application here in place running on an Azure container app. And the last topic, just to show it up, when we here in my Azure subscription, we see here the resource group. This one should be the static web app with all the resources in place, West Europe, so it looks pretty good. And this one here is the container apps environment, log analytics workspace, and the registry. So we also have the possibility to double check it in the Azure portal. And the first user group is my demo backup environment for the static web app, which is also linked to the slides repo. Okay, so now I'm at the end of my session, Q&A time. Thanks for listening, everyone. So if you have any questions, any feedback at all, it's highly appreciated. And again, thanks to Jonah and Hakan for giving me the opportunity to present my topic over here.
Yes, so thank you so much, Till here for this lovely session. Actually, Jonah, I can't unmute you because you have muted yourself. So
Okay.
at this point in time, we don't have. Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Great. Yes. Sorry, guys. I'm having technical problems on the backstage. So, I'm asking Alkan to control my mic, but it looks like it works. I could do it quickly. But thank you so much, Till, for the great session. It was a great demo. And so, do we have questions so far?
No, so far we don't have any questions, but I have a question here for you, Till.
Yeah.
Because when you read up on infrastructure as code, then inevitably you see that there are a couple of different options here. Like you could use Pulumi that we have seen, but you could also use Bicep, or you could use Terraform. So do you have any sort of guidelines on when should you use what, or maybe what could be an advantage of using Pulumi in this case instead of going for the other ones?
Yeah,
That's a
great question.
pretty tough question because it sometimes
Tough
feels a
one.
little bit like a religious one. Some folks are sticking to Terraform and saying that's the only way to go. Other people are using biceps or ARM templates on the Azure end. And yeah, for my opinion, Pulumi is bridges a little bit the gap from the developer. So when you're coming with a developer background, for example, for me, it felt a little more easy to learn using the SDK provided from Pulumi to create resources than using a completely new language on the Terraform and HCL, for example. So in my secure space, I know how to write a for each loop, for example, or using LINQ in my C# projects, and so I felt more secure. And that's for me also a reason to get into new topics and discover new SDKs and hear a whole new world with the infrastructure as code. But yeah, I think there is no objective guidance,
Yeah.
which is the best way to go. I totally understand everyone who's saying no, Terraform is the better way because this or that. To be honest, on Terraform, you also have some C# SDKs available, which can be used there as well. So yeah, in my combination coming from the .NET project or .NET C# world, it's fitting into the ecosystem and just adding some additional projects, some stuff, and then when I have small projects, for example, so maybe that's to add, if you want to handle infrastructure with virtual machines and VNets, so Azure Bastion, all the hard stuff on the Azure side, I think I wouldn't use Pulumi for this kind of topics. But if you have a static website or a container app, for example, so the smaller one, which is directly connected to source code in the background, I would go the Pulumi way. And maybe other forks using Python, for example, also have the gap or the bridge between using, okay, now I have to learn Terraform to host my application, for example, and then it's maybe pretty easier to just follow along the SDK and using the existing stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the answer. I have something to add. I think it really depends. There are pros and cons in all of those like
Sure.
options. Like for example, I at work I use Terraform because that's the solution that they chosen. But Terraform is known to have this like multi-cloud alternative. And then if you use Bicep, if you only have your infrastructure in Azure, then of course it's very close to the Microsoft stack. And so there are pros and cons because in Terraform you have to handle the state management as well, which led me to my personal question next to Håkan. And we have a few more also questions that came out just now. How does the state management works in terms of AAC, infrastructure as code, with Pulumi? How do you handle the state there?
So the state, I think, is handled within the stacks. So to make
Okay.
sure the stacks hold, or in my opinion, it's the same basic concept like the state
Okay.
manager on the Terraform side. The stack on the Pulumi end holds all the information, which resources are already deployed in which state. And so then it's doing some internal stuff, I guess, to make sure which resources have to recreate it, for example, or to be updated. And yeah, so in my opinion, the state management is part of the stacks, and the stacks is some basic concept and also done by Pulumi itself. So I can specify for sure how the stack should look like in my environment, but I think the state management is part over inside of the
Okay.
Pulumi core functionality.
Right. Okay. We do have two questions,
Mm.
Hoken. Can we show one of them? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. From let's see if we pronounce the name Haribansh Gupta. Please excuse me if I mispronounce. But the question is how Pulumi is in terms of cost optimization.
That's a good question. I'm not pretty sure. I've not looked into the topic about cost optimization, to be honest. So I don't know to. So yeah,
It's time. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
someone is
a tough
reminding you.
question because I'm not in know for now. Yeah, it's just normal Azure resources at the end which are deployed to Azure. So
Yeah.
it's just another approach than using Bicep and Pulumi.
Yeah.
So it's more,
Agree.
I think, the setup reason. Because when you
Yeah.
use the container apps, you have all the required stuff you have to run the container app. Yeah. So
Yeah, I would have to add. I can add something. So I think, regardless of whatever infrastructure as code language we're using, it all costs actually depends on what Azure resource you're
yeah,
implementing. So there are free services, but if a project really needs to know how much would it cost and optimize it, I think I would recommend the Azure pricing calculator, and the cost
definitely,
management
definitely.
in the Azure portal would really help in optimizing and then cost alerts. So I hope that helped answer the question of Harry Bunch. Yes.
We also have another question here from Taco Susuyama. Hope I pronounced that one right too. So Taco asks, can we build API endpoints instead of websites with Pulumi?
For sure. If you want to use the app, I'm not pretty sure how the Azure product is called, the
Azure,
API.
yeah. Azure
Azure
API
API.
management, I think.
I guess,
Yes,
yeah, it's
yes. Yeah.
possible to pack it into a Pulumi project and then create your Azure API endpoints over there instead of a static website, for sure.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, great. Do we have more? I think none now. All right. Okay. I think no more questions, Okan, right? I think
Yes.
so. Yes. All
So,
right.
so let's put up here our banner here for the Zoom link. So after we finish this session here on StreamYard, we would like to invite you for a Zoom Fika, which is basically a very informal Zoom meeting where we can talk and discuss more about this session
Topic.
with Jonah and me. Yes.
Yes, until couldn't join us because family is waiting. But if there's any advanced questions that you have on the session at the Zoom, we're gonna save it and we're gonna bug Till and ask that question back to you. So
Sure,
thank you
sure.
so much. Yeah, we will do. So please join us and don't forget to claim your Azure Learner badge as well. But thank you so much, Teal, for your time
Yeah.
today. We
Thanks for having
appreciate
me
it,
here.
and please thanks your wife for the
I
patience.
will.
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Thank you,
Bye bye.
everyone. Have a great
Yes.
weekend, and see you in 2 weeks again for the next session. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.